Undercover female CEO dines at her own restaurant, but stops. When the janitor says 3 words. The sound hit first the soft hiss of champagne fizzing, followed by the crash of crystal against marble. Then came silence, sharp and total. Inside, Sterling & Co., the city's most expensive restaurant, time seemed to stop. Cutlery froze midair. The pianist's fingers hesitated on the keys, and every whisper died in a single heartbeat. At the center of it all stood Ava Sterling, the woman whose name was engraved in gold above the front doors. She was elegance, wrapped in discipline, the kind of presence that made waiters hold their breath and investors check their posture. Tonight, though her composure was bleeding down the hem of her white silk dress, a glass of red wine had just exploded across her lap. The young waiter responsible had gone pale. He stammered something that sounded like, "I'm so sorry," but his voice cracked barely a whisper above the hum of the chandelier. Ava didn't move. Not yet. Her jaw tensed the way it always did before she delivered judgment. Around her, the staff scattered like startled birds terrified of what she might say. She'd built an empire on perfection, and perfection never forgave. Then, before anyone could react, a man appeared. He wasn't wearing a suit or a name tag. His gray uniform was simple sleeves, rolled the faint smell of disinfectant and soap clinging to him. Daniel Reyes, the night janitor. Tall, quiet, with calloused hands and the posture of someone used to apologizing for taking up space. He moved quickly but gently, kneeling beside her as if approaching a frightened animal. The faint squeak of his mop bucket echoed against the marble floor. Without asking permission, he began blotting the red stain with a folded white cloth. His hands were steady. "Please don't touch that," one of the servers hissed. "She's..." Daniel interrupted softly, his voice low but firm. "It's just wine." 3 words. Simple. Ordinary. But something in the tone, calm, unhurried, almost tender, rippled through the frozen air. Ava blinked. She'd been prepared for excuses, panic, or groveling. Not this. Not the quiet certainty of a man who looked at her not as a CEO, but as a person with a ruined dress and a bad night. "It'll come out," he added after a pause, pressing the towel gently to the fabric. Warm water. Time. The waiter stood motionless, waiting for an explosion that never came. Ava exhaled slowly. Around her, the sounds of the restaurant began to return, the clinking of silverware, a nervous laugh from the corner table, the piano stumbling back into melody. But something inside her had shifted. She didn't know why she was still watching this janitor's hands, the way they moved with care as if the stain itself mattered. Daniel glanced up, meeting her eyes briefly. His expression was unreadable. Not pity, not fear. Just quiet respect. Then he wrung out the cloth and returned to the task as if he'd been born to it. When the head manager finally rushed over, flushed and sweating, Ava raised a hand before he could speak. "It's fine," she said, surprising herself. "Accidents happen." A murmur spread through the staff. The waiter nearly collapsed in relief. The manager stared confused because Ava Sterling never said "it's fine." Daniel nodded, once stood and collected his bucket. The faint squeal of its wheels faded as he disappeared behind the kitchen door. For the rest of the evening, Ava couldn't shake those 3 words. "It's just wine." They echoed between her ribs like a heartbeat she'd forgotten she had. When she finally left the restaurant, the rain had started a cold, thin drizzle whispering against the pavement. Her driver opened the car door, but she hesitated, looking back through the glass at the lights still glowing inside Sterling & Co. She thought of the man with the calm voice and steady hands. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not since her father years ago when life had been simple and dinner didn't cost a paycheck. She climbed into the car, but even as the city blurred past, the scent of Cabernet and cleaning soap lingered. Across town, Daniel hung up his mop in the supply closet. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. His back ached, his palms were cracked from bleach and soap. He rubbed the wedding ring that wasn't there anymore. On the locker door, a child's drawing was taped crookedly crayons, a stick figure of him holding hands with a smaller one under a crooked sun. "Me and Daddy," it said in bright letters. He smiled faintly. His daughter Emma, 10 years old, slept at home with a neighbor watching over her. He'd promised her he'd be back by midnight, but promises had a way of breaking when you worked 2 jobs. He whispered to himself, "Almost done, kiddo." The floor cleaner buzzed faintly as he pushed it across the tile. The rhythmic hum calmed him. For Daniel, noise was accompany the clang of dishes, the whisper of brooms, the low thud of the trash chute. Those sounds meant he was still useful. But tonight, something else filled his mind, the look on that woman's face. The CEO. He hadn't known who she was until the manager whispered her name in horror. Ava Sterling. The woman behind every policy, every memo, every cut costs order that made nights like this longer. He didn't mean to say those words to her. They'd just come out. It's just wine. A reflex from a life before this one, before illness, before debt, before loss. A time when he'd been a teacher who told his students not to cry over broken things. He turned off the machine and listened. The kitchen was quiet except for the slow drip of a faucet. The smell of roasted garlic and lemon butter still clung to the air. He closed his eyes and for a brief moment imagined music instead of machines. Back at her penthouse, Ava poured herself another glass of wine, this time white. The air was too still. The ticking of the wall clock seemed louder than usual. Why had that man's voice stayed with her? She replayed the moment, his calm, the lack of fear. Everyone around her always seemed afraid. Her board, her managers, even the people who smiled at her on camera. But he hadn't been. She looked down at the stain on her dress. Even after dry cleaning, the faint scent of red wine lingered. Beneath it was something else, a trace of soap, maybe. The smell of the janitor's towel. It reminded her of something old, something safe. Ava set the glass down, her reflection rippling in the liquid. Somewhere deep in her chest, something small and stubborn began to stir. She whispered the words again, half to herself. "It's just wine." But the truth pressed quietly behind them. Then why does it still hurt? Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The rain thickened, tapping against the window like a slow heartbeat. Ava closed her eyes, but sleep refused to come. Far below, in a tiny apartment across the city, Daniel was watching the same storm, wondering why 3 simple words spoken to a stranger had felt like a prayer. And neither of them knew that tonight's accident was only the beginning, a crack in the armor of 2 lives built on silence about to collide again in ways neither could imagine. The city never slept, but Ava Sterling did, or at least she used to. Tonight, the skyline glittered like a crown outside her penthouse window, but she felt no pride looking at it. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, flawless and lifeless. She lifted her wine glass again, then set it down untouched. The sound of the stem tapping the marble counter was sharp in the silence. It echoed through the room like the voice she couldn't stop hearing. "It's just wine." Those words should have been meaningless, but they clung to her like the faint stain still visible on her dress. She tried to focus on the documents glowing on her laptop: sales reports, staff, turnover rates, customer satisfaction scores. Numbers. Safe, predictable numbers. But all she could think about was the janitor's face. The calm eyes, the unshakable steadiness, the way his voice had carried no judgment, no fear. Something about that unsettled her more than the spilled wine ever could. Ava closed the laptop and stood. The room was too quiet. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzz of the city outside, everything sounded distant, artificial. She walked barefoot across the cold marble floor, the echo of each step reminding her how empty the space really was. For a woman who owned 40 restaurants, she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten with another person. The next morning, she sat in her office high above the city, a cup of black coffee cooling beside her. Her assistant, Melanie, stood nervously in the doorway. "Miss Garon, Sterling," she began softly. "You asked for the employee reports from the Sterling and Kermit downtown location." Ava gestured for her to set them down. "Thank you." Melanie hesitated. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" "You look tired." Ava's eyes flicked up. "Do I?" Melanie nodded, flustered. "Yes, no, not bad tired, just thoughtful." Ava tapped a pen against the desk, the sound sharp. "You can go." When the door closed, Ava leaned back in her chair, exhaling. The employee turnover rate at that particular restaurant was alarming. Cooks quitting, servers filing complaints, morale at an all-time low. Yet profits were stable on paper, everything looked fine. But it didn't feel fine, she thought. That man Daniel, he worked there, didn't he? The janitor. Something inside her stirred again. Curiosity, maybe. Or guilt. For years, she'd believed leadership meant distance, that respect came from fear. But that night, with a mop bucket between them and red wine staining her dress, she hadn't felt powerful. She'd felt human. And it scared her. By late afternoon, rain had started again, thin needles against glass. The sound filled her office with an odd rhythm, steady and grounding. Ava picked up her phone and called the restaurant's general manager. "Mark, cancel my evening meetings," she said. "I'll be dining at Sterling & Co. tonight. No reservations, no announcement." There was a pause. "Understood, Miss Sterling. Will you need a private table?" "No," she said after a beat. "I'll sit in the main room. Treat me like any other customer." When she hung up, she surprised herself by smiling. For the first time in a long time, she didn't know exactly what she was walking into. Daniel arrived at work that same evening just before 6. The air in the back hallway smelled like lemons and steel cleaning fluid and ambition. He clocked in, grabbed his mop, and nodded to the kitchen staff. "You're early," said Betty, the gray-haired dishwasher who'd worked there since before Daniel was born. "Emma's at a friend's house," he replied. "Figured I'd get a head start." Betty smirked. "That's what makes you different, sweetheart. You never wait for the mess to come to you." He chuckled softly, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. He hadn't told anyone about the woman from last night. How could he? She was the boss, unreachable, untouchable. Yet her eyes had followed him even after she'd left somewhere behind the noise of his own conscience. Ava stepped through the restaurant doors just after 7. Gone was the armor of her tailored suit. In its place, a simple black coat, jeans, and no makeup. The hostess greeted her politely, unaware she was speaking to the owner herself. "Table for one," yes, Ava said. Somewhere quiet, if possible. As she sat, she could hear everything, the clinking of glasses, the sizzle from the kitchen, the laughter of diners. But beneath it all, she recognized something else: fatigue. The waiters' smiles didn't reach their eyes. The manager's voice was tight, impatient. It was the same cold efficiency she had built reflected back at her like a mirror. Then she saw him. Daniel was across the room, pushing a mop along the far wall. He worked slowly, rhythmically. His presence seemed to soften the edges of the place like music so gentle you only noticed it when it stopped. Ava's heart thudded once sharply. She hadn't expected to feel anything. But here it was again, that strange pull, equal parts curiosity and shame. She watched as an elderly couple struggled to carry their tray. Daniel noticed, set his mop aside, and quietly took it from them, guiding them to their table. "There you go," he said kindly. "Enjoy your meal." They thanked him, and he smiled, small, genuine, the kind of smile that didn't need witnesses. Ava couldn't look away. When her server came by, she barely glanced at the menu. "I'll have whatever you recommend," she murmured. The young woman blinked. "Anything specific, ma'am?" "Surprise me." Throughout the dinner, Ava found herself listening more than eating, listening to the rhythm of the room, the small sounds of life. She'd forgotten the scrape of chairs, the clatter of dishes, Daniel's low voice as he greeted staff by name. He knows them all, she realized. He sees them. When her meal ended, she rose quietly and walked toward the hallway leading to the restrooms, just close enough to pass him. Daniel looked up. Recognition flickered across his face, then confusion. "You," he said softly. Ava froze. "Me." He tilted his head. "From last night, the wine." "Oh." Her throat tightened. "Yes, that was me." "You look different," he said simply. Happier, maybe. She almost laughed at that. I doubt it. He smiled faintly. Then maybe you're just trying. The air between them felt heavy but not uncomfortable. For a moment, the noise of the restaurant faded away, replaced by the sound of rain tapping against the glass outside. Ava wanted to say something, thank you, maybe, or ask how he could still sound so calm in a world that kept breaking, but before she could, a voice shouted from the kitchen. Daniel Spill in aisle 2. He gave a small nod and turned away. Duty calls. Ava watched him disappear again, the mop squeaking softly against the tile. When she stepped outside minutes later, the rain had stopped. The city lights shimmered off the wet pavement, reflecting her own pale outline. She whispered to herself, Maybe it's not just wine. For the first time in years, she didn't head straight home. Instead, she stood there under the fading drizzle, wondering what it might feel like to be seen the way that Janitor saw the world, without fear, without judgment. And somewhere deep inside, she knew she'd be back. The next evening, the rain had washed the city clean, leaving the streets slick and glistening beneath the glow of restaurant signs. Ava Sterling stood across the street from Sterling & Co., her own name shining above the entrance like a crown she no longer felt she'd earned. Her reflection shimmered in the wet pavement, dark coat-plain sweater hair pulled back. She looked nothing like the woman who usually commanded this place. That was the point. Tonight she wasn't coming as a CEO, she was coming as a customer. Her heart ticked faster than the crosswalk light. For years, she'd walked into her restaurant surrounded by PR teams, photographers, and managers scrambling to impress her. This was the first time she'd ever walked in alone. Inside, the air carried the same familiar mix of roasted garlic lemon and soft piano music. But without the filter of authority, everything felt different. Louder, warmer, more human. She could hear the laughter from the bar, the chatter of servers comparing tips, the quiet clinking of silverware like wind chimes. And there, near the far corner, was Daniel. He was pushing a mop, slow and steady, pausing now and then to nod to passing staff. There was something grounding about him, like the restaurant's heartbeat. Even when the manager barked instructions across the room, Daniel's movements stayed calm, rhythmic, mop squeeze, step, repeat. Ava sat near the back, half hidden by a tall potted plant. She felt absurdly nervous. Her disguise, a simple pair of glasses and no makeup, wasn't much, but in this room where everyone only ever saw her polished, perfect version, it was enough. Her waiter, a young man named Tom, brought her water. First time here, he asked with an eager smile. Ava hesitated. Something like that. Well, you picked a good night. The chef's trying a new special seared halibut with citrus glaze. That sounds fine, she said. Coming right up. She watched him walk away, noting how carefully he avoided the puddle near the service station. Daniel must have cleaned there earlier. Even his invisible work shaped how people moved through the room. Across the restaurant, an elderly woman tried to balance a tray of soup bowls, her hands trembling. Before Ava could react, Daniel appeared at her side. "Let me help you with that, ma'am," he said softly. The woman smiled gratefully, her voice quivering. "You're too kind, young man." Daniel chuckled. "I'll take young as a compliment." The entire exchange lasted maybe 20 seconds, but something in it stopped Ava cold. It was so effortless, so genuine. No cameras, no audience, just kindness for its own sake. She felt a pinch in her chest, a strange, unfamiliar warmth mixed with envy. When was the last time I spoke to someone like that, without calculating what it would cost or gain me? Her meal arrived perfectly plated. She took one bite, barely tasting it. The real story was unfolding just a few tables away. A group of loud businessmen had arrived, their laughter sharp and echoing. They ordered rounds of drinks, snapping their fingers at the staff. Ava watched their server, a petite girl named Haley, juggle trays with shaking hands. Then, predictably, it happened. One of the men, already drunk, bumped his elbow into a wine glass, sending red liquid cascading across the white tablecloth. The woman beside him gasped. The manager rushed forward, flustered. Haley apologized over and over, even though it wasn't her fault. And there was Daniel again. He appeared out of nowhere as if summoned by chaos. "Let me handle this," he said quietly. He knelt, blotting the spill with practiced ease. The drunken man muttered, "You should be faster, pal. We're paying enough for this place." Daniel looked up, not angry, not submissive, just calm. "You're right, sir," he said, voice even. "But the wine's got its own pace." The man blinked, confused. The tension broke, replaced by an awkward laugh. "Yeah, guess it does." The manager exhaled in relief. The guests settled. Ava felt her throat tighten. The wine's got its own pace. How did he do that? Diffuse an entire storm with one line. Her managers trained for weeks to manage crises, but none of them carried this man's grace. He just turned conflict into understanding without authority, without fear. The thought unnerved her. When Daniel rose to his feet, he glanced in her direction as if sensing her gaze. Their eyes met for a moment too long. Ava looked away quickly, pretending to study her napkin. An hour later, she was still there long after her plate had been cleared. The restaurant had quieted. Jazz hummed low from the speakers like a heartbeat winding down. Daniel was near the bar now, rinsing out his mop in the utility sink. The sound of running water mixed with faint laughter from the last few customers. Ava found herself standing before she realized it, walking toward him. "Excuse me," she said softly. He turned. His eyes were kind but wary. "Yes, ma'am." "You were here last night," she said. "When there was an accident." Daniel studied her face. "You're the woman with the dress." Her lips twitched. "That's one way to put it. Glad it came out." "The stain." He nodded. "Warm water time. Works on most things." She smiled faintly. "And what doesn't it work on?" He considered that, leaning on his mop. "Pride, maybe?" Ava felt her breath catch. "Pride. Yeah," he said, almost to himself. "That one's harder to wash out." They stood there for a long second, the air humming between them. Ava didn't know what to say. For a man who spent his nights cleaning other people's messes, he sure knew how to make her confront her own. Before she could answer, someone called from the kitchen. "Daniel, we're short on towels again." He gave a small nod. "Duty calls." As he turned away, Ava said quietly, "Thank you." He paused. "For what?" "For reminding me that some stains need more than bleach." He smiled, that same quiet smile that had disarmed an entire room the night before. "You'd be surprised what time can fix," he said, and disappeared through the swinging doors. Ava stood alone, listening to the sounds fade, the clatter of plates, the whoosh of the kitchen door, the low hum of a conversation still lingering like smoke. Something inside her had shifted again, deeper this time. The woman who walked out into the cool night air wasn't the same one who'd entered. As she stepped into the drizzle, she whispered under her breath, "Warm water and time." Then she caught herself smiling just a little. But what she didn't realize was that time, like wine, had its own pace, and before it could heal, it would have to stir everything she'd buried first. The next week, Ava returned to the restaurant more times than she cared to admit. At first, she told herself it was business quiet, undercover observation for a company audit. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Each night she walked in, she told herself the same lie, just dinner. Just one meal. Yet, somehow, her gaze always drifted to the far corner where Daniel moved like the rhythm of the place itself, steady, grounded, unnoticed. He had that same quiet grace, the kind that made the chaos of the kitchen seem to slow down around him. And every time she heard the soft squeak of his mop, or the low hum of his voice greeting someone by name, something inside her softened, and it scared her more than she wanted to admit. Tonight she chose a small table near the back. The air buzzed faintly with laughter and conversation. The smell of baked bread and lemon butter hung in the air, comforting, yet heavy with memory. Ava wasn't used to watching people. Usually, people watched her. But now she was the observer, invisible, anonymous, and strangely free. Daniel appeared from the hallway, rolling his bucket. A small child at one of the tables waved at him, and he grinned, giving a theatrical bow that made the little girl giggle. Ava couldn't help smiling. When was the last time I made anyone laugh without trying? She thought. When was the last time I even wanted to? The server brought her food soup still steaming, and Ava nodded absently. But her attention was elsewhere. Daniel was helping an older man who'd dropped his cane. He moved slowly, gently, placing the cane back in the man's hand and saying something Ava couldn't hear. She watched him stand dusting his palms on his work pants, and she realized something about him unsettled her. He seemed untouched by bitterness. People who'd been through pain, real pain, usually carried it like armor. But Daniel's pain wasn't armor. It was a mirror. When he looked at others, he saw their hurts, not his own. When the dinner rush finally eased, Ava lingered tracing the rim of her wine glass. The pianist in the corner played a slow tune that melted into the chatter of departing guests. The restaurant breathed out relaxing after the chaos. Daniel was wiping down the counter near her table. His sleeves were rolled up forearms glistening with water. "Long night?" she asked quietly. He looked up surprised to find her there. "They all are," he said, then added with a soft grin. "But that's how you earn your rest." "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked. "Cleaning up after everyone else?" He paused, his gaze drifting to the mop in his hand. "Tired, sure, but not of helping. Everyone leaves a mess behind, some are just easier to see." She tilted her head, intrigued. "That's a strange way to look at it." He shrugged. "Strange keeps me sane." For a moment she almost laughed. The sound would have startled her. Instead, she said, "You always this philosophical, or is it just the mop fumes?" that made him laugh, a deep, warm sound that filled the quiet like music. Ava found herself smiling back, but then his expression shifted, thoughtful, distant. "You know, people spill more than drinks." The words hung in the air, gentle but heavy. Ava's breath caught. He continued softly. "They spill their tempers, their fears, their pain. Most of the time they don't mean to. But if no one's there to wipe it up, the stain stays." For a moment, she forgot to breathe. That line, "people spill more than drinks," struck her like a truth she hadn't known she was missing. Inside her, something cracked open, a small fracture in the shell she'd built over years of control. "You talk like someone who's seen a lot," she said quietly. He met her gaze. "You don't spend years cleaning floors without learning what people drop when they think no one's watching." Silence lingered. The only sound was the soft clatter of plates being stacked in the distance. Then, unexpectedly, Ava said, "I used to think success meant control, that if I just kept everything spotless, nothing could fall apart." Daniel nodded slowly. "How's that working out?" She smiled faintly. "I'll let you know." They both laughed, not loud but genuine. The kind of laugh that felt like a bridge being built. Later that night, Ava sat alone in her car outside the restaurant. The rain had started again, pattering gently on the windshield. She replayed the conversation in her mind, his voice, those words. People spill more than drinks. They weren't just poetic. They were personal. Ava had spent her entire career cleaning up other people's mistakes, investors' missteps, employees' failures, public scandals. But she'd never once thought about the stains she'd left behind, the lives she'd brushed off with her pursuit of perfection. The rain grew heavier, and she leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes. The rhythmic tapping on the roof felt like a heartbeat, steady and unrelenting. Somewhere across the city, Daniel was probably home by now, maybe tucking his daughter into bed. Ava imagined the sound of that, a child's laughter, a small apartment filled with warmth instead of glass and silence. She envied him, not for what he had, but for what he hadn't lost. The next morning, she couldn't focus. Her meetings blurred together, voices merging into white noise. When one of her board members bragged about cutting staff hours to save margins, she caught herself frowning, something she'd never done before. "Are you all right, Miss Sterling?" he asked. She forced a smile. "Just thinking." But what she was really thinking about was Daniel's face when he said those words, how steady his voice had been, how unshaken he'd seemed by the chaos around him. That night when she returned home, she hung up her coat and stood in the kitchen staring at her reflection in the black glass of the oven door. For the first time in years, she wondered if she'd become the very kind of mess she'd built her empire to avoid. She whispered into the quiet, testing the words like they belonged to someone else. People spill more than drinks. And just like that, the silence around her didn't feel as comforting as it used to. It felt hollow. Across town, Daniel sat at the edge of his daughter's bed. Emma was half asleep, her hair fanned out like sunlight on the pillow. "Daddy," she murmured drowsily, "do you still clean the big restaurant?" "Every night," he said softly. "Do they say thank you?" He smiled. "Not usually." She frowned, still half in dreams. "Then I'll say it twice for them." Daniel swallowed hard. "That's plenty, kiddo." He turned off the lamp, leaving only the soft hum of the rain outside the window. He could still hear her breathing, slow and even. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself whispering into the dark, "Some stains take longer to fade." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, quiet, almost tender. Neither Ava nor Daniel knew it yet, but those 3 words had just built a bridge between 2 very different worlds. And before long, that bridge would be tested by truths neither of them were ready to face. The following nights blurred together like watercolor soft familiar and quietly haunting. Ava found herself drawn to the same corner table at Sterling & Co., the same one that offered her an unguarded view of Daniel at work. She told herself it was a coincidence that she simply liked the atmosphere. But deep down, she knew better. Each night she watched the rhythm of his movements, the quiet efficiency, the small acts of kindness that went unseen. A nod to a busboy, a soft thank you to a dishwasher the way he'd straighten a crooked picture frame or refill an elderly customer's water without being asked. It wasn't part of his job description, but he did it anyway. He never looked hurried, never distracted. Ava envied that. Her entire life was a sprint one deadline to the next, but this man, this janitor, seemed to live at the pace of breath. Tonight, the restaurant hummed with its usual symphony of sounds, clinking, cutlery, muffled laughter, the occasional burst of steam from the kitchen. Ava stirred her coffee and listened, absorbing the small noises that made the place feel alive. When Daniel appeared near her table, she greeted him with an easy familiarity that surprised them both. "Evening," she said. He smiled, the kind that lived mostly in his eyes. "Evening. Back again, I guess I like the view." She replied, then caught herself. "Of the restaurant, I mean." Daniel chuckled softly, wringing out his mop. "It's a good one. You get to see what most people miss." "And what's that?" He shrugged. "The people who make it work." His words lingered like the faint scent of soap that always seemed to follow him. Ava found herself leaning forward. "You know everyone here, don't you?" He nodded. "Kinda have to. The floors remember who walks them." She smiled, though her chest tightened at the thought. "You speak like a poet for someone with a mop." Daniel laughed. "Used to be a teacher. Guess old habits die hard." That single sentence shifted something in the air. Ava's eyes lifted, her curiosity catching fire. A teacher. He hesitated, eyes lowering to the floor he'd just cleaned. "Yeah, English. Small high school upstate." "What happened?" she asked, her voice gentle. He was quiet for a long time, the sound of rain beginning to patter faintly against the windows. When he finally spoke, his voice had softened. "Life. My wife got sick. Bills piled up. School let me go and I couldn't keep up with the hours. By the time she passed, I just needed something steady, something that didn't require pretending I was fine." Ava felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry." Daniel gave a small smile, not of pity but acceptance. "Don't be." She loved this city. Said it was made of stories waiting to be cleaned up and told again. That line, so simple, so full of quiet wisdom, struck her harder than she expected. "Do you have family?" she asked, hoping the question didn't sound intrusive. "Just me and my daughter," he said. "Emma? She's 10, smarter than I'll ever be." Ava smiled faintly. "She's lucky." "No," he said softly. "I'm the lucky one." He checked his watch. "Speaking of which, she'll kill me if I don't call before bedtime." Ava nodded. "Don't let me keep you." He gave her a warm smile. "You couldn't even if you tried." She watched him disappear through the back hallway, the faint creak of the door swinging shut behind him. For a moment, the restaurant noise faded into a gentle hum, like a radio tuned between stations. Ava realized she was holding her breath. Outside, the rain had strengthened. Daniel stepped into the narrow alley beside the restaurant phone pressed to his ear. "Hey, Bug," he said softly. On the other end, a child's voice chirped with sleepy joy. "Daddy, you're late again." "I know," he said. "Busy night. Did you finish your homework?" "Yeah." Mrs. Harper said, "I read the best essay in class." He smiled, water dripping from his hair. "Of course you did. You're my kid." There was a pause. "Did you eat Daddy working on it?" He lied. She sighed dramatically. "You always say that." Daniel chuckled, leaning against the brick wall, watching the glow of the streetlights shimmer in puddles. Okay, I promise. I'll grab something before I get home." "Pinky, promise." He lifted his little finger toward the rain-dark sky. "Pinky, promise." Her laughter through the phone was the warmest sound he knew. When they finally hung up, he stood there for a while, letting the rain soak into his sleeves. He thought about the woman inside the elegant customer who looked at him differently than most. There was something in her eyes, something searching. He couldn't name it yet, but it lingered like a melody he couldn't forget. Later that night, as the restaurant emptied, Ava stayed behind. The staff didn't notice her tucked away in the corner, lost in thought. She watched Daniel gather leftovers from the kitchen, small boxes of food he packed neatly into paper bags. He whispered something to the head chef, who nodded in understanding. Then Daniel slipped out the back door. Ava's curiosity got the better of her. She followed at a distance, careful not to be seen. Out on the street, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Daniel crossed the road to a small park dimly lit by flickering lamps. There, beneath an old canopy, sat a man wrapped in blankets, homeless, shivering. Daniel knelt beside him, handing over one of the paper bags. "Still warm," he said. "Lemon chicken tonight." The man's voice cracked with gratitude. "You're a good one, Danny." "Just trying to keep the city fed," Daniel replied softly. "Same time tomorrow, God bless you." Daniel smiled faintly, adjusting the man's blanket before heading back toward the restaurant. Ava stood frozen under her umbrella. Her chest ached with something she hadn't felt in years, shame, admiration, longing, maybe all three. Here was a man who earned barely enough to live, yet still gave away what little he had. And she, with her luxury and success, couldn't remember the last time she'd done anything that didn't benefit her bottom line. As Daniel disappeared around the corner, she whispered to herself, "He's cleaning more than floors." The rain thickened again, drumming against her umbrella like applause. She didn't know it yet, but that moment watching him give away food to a stranger would follow her into every decision she made after this. It was the night Ava Sterling began to see the dirt beneath her own polished empire, and for the first time she wasn't sure how to clean it. The following evening began like any other: polished tables, soft jazz, the low hum of conversations blending with the sound of clinking glasses. Sterling and Coder glowed in its usual elegance, unaware that tonight would test everyone inside it. Ava arrived early, slipping quietly into her usual table in the back. She wasn't in disguise anymore, not really. The staff still didn't recognize her as the owner, but the act of pretending no longer felt like deception. It felt like discovery. She scanned the room with a practiced eye. Years of running a company had taught her to notice flaws: fingerprints on glass, uneven lighting, the too loud chatter of a customer who'd had one drink too many. But tonight, her attention wasn't on the flaws. It was on the people. Daniel was working near the bar, refilling water pitchers, humming softly to himself. The song, she realized, was the same tune the pianist often played near closing. Simple, tender, almost like a lullaby. Ava leaned forward, listening. It wasn't the hum itself, but the peace in it that caught her. The man radiated calm in a place that demanded perfection. Then, suddenly, the sound shattered. A crash rang out sharp, startling. A tray of crystal glasses had slipped from the hands of a young waiter. The pieces exploded across the marble floor, scattering like rain in every direction. Conversation stopped. The manager, a tall man in a tight vest named Carl, stormed in from the kitchen. "What happened here?" Carl barked. The waiter froze his face pale. I tripped, sir. I'm so sorry." "Do you have any idea how much those glasses cost?" Carl snapped. "You'll be paying for them out of your check." The waiter's lip trembled. "Please, sir, it was an accident." Ava felt her stomach twist. She'd seen this dynamic before, fear flowing downward, blame rolling with it. It was the kind of leadership she herself had once preached. And then Daniel stepped forward. "It was me," he said quietly. The entire room turned toward him. Carl blinked. "What did you just say?" Daniel repeated. "I knocked the tray when I came around the corner." "It was my fault." "That's impossible," Carl said sharply. "You weren't even near." Daniel didn't flinch. "Still, I should have been paying attention." Carl's voice rose. "You're the janitor, not a hero. Don't cover for incompetence." "I'm not covering," Daniel said. "I'm taking responsibility." Ava watched her chest tightening. The waiter looked at Daniel as if he'd just been handed back his dignity. Carl sneered. "Fine. If it's your fault, you can clean this up and you're suspended for the rest of the week." The words hit the air like a slap. The restaurant buzzed with low murmurs. Daniel simply nodded. Understood. Carl turned and marched away. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Ava wanted to speak to Stan to reveal who she was and stop this madness. But she couldn't, not yet. Revealing herself now would end the fragile authenticity she'd been chasing. Instead, she sat frozen, heart-pounding. Daniel knelt and began to pick up the pieces one by one, careful not to cut himself. The small clicks of glass against the dustpan echoed through the room. The young waiter crouched beside him. "You didn't have to do that," he whispered. Daniel smiled faintly. "Sure I did. It's just glass." The boy shook his head. "You'll lose a week's pay." Daniel shrugged. "Money comes back. Pride doesn't." Those words struck Ava like a whisper meant for her. Money comes back. Pride doesn't. She'd built her entire empire on profit margins and precision. But sitting there, watching him bleed slightly from a nick on his finger as he worked, she realized how fragile that empire truly was. When the crowd thinned and the night quieted, Ava waited near the door until Daniel emerged from the kitchen, his jacket damp from cleaning solution. "Rough night," she said softly. He chuckled, rubbing his shoulder. "They're all rough in their own way. You didn't have to take the blame." He shrugged again. "The kids knew. First mistake sticks harder than the rest. That mistake cost you your paycheck." Maybe, he said, meeting her gaze. But it also cost him his fear. Seems like a fair trade. Ava felt something in her chest pull tight. "You shouldn't have to lose for someone else to learn." Daniel smiled. "Sometimes losing teaches you more than winning ever could." There it was again, that quiet wisdom that wrapped itself around her like a blanket she didn't know she needed. She hesitated before speaking. "Doesn't it ever get exhausting? Being the one who cleans up everyone else's mess." Daniel's expression softened. "I used to think so. Then I realized maybe that's what I'm here for." He stepped closer, the faint smell of soap and citrus trailing with him. "Everyone makes a mess eventually. The trick isn't avoiding it, it's knowing what's worth cleaning up." For a moment, Ava couldn't look away. His eyes were tired but kind, the kind that didn't demand forgiveness but somehow offered it anyway. She wanted to tell him who she was, to apologize for what she represented for the system that had built him up just enough to keep him down. But the words stayed trapped behind her tongue. "Good night, miss," he asked gently. She hesitated, then lied again. "Grace," she said. "My name's Grace." Daniel nodded. "Good night, Grace." He turned and disappeared down the back corridor, leaving her standing there under the dim glow of the exit sign. Ava exhaled the lie, tasting bitter on her tongue. Grace. The name didn't belong to her, not yet, anyway. Outside, the night was colder than usual. She pulled her coat tight, her heels clicking on the wet sidewalk. The image of him kneeling among broken glass replayed in her mind, calm, unbothered, willing to bleed for someone else's mistake. She wondered when she'd last done the same. When she reached her car, she paused, staring at her reflection in the rain-speckled window. The woman looking back wasn't the Ava Sterling who'd built an empire. She was someone smaller, quieter, someone who was starting to see that maybe the things she'd spent years perfecting weren't the ones that mattered. In the distance, thunder rolled softly, a low, steady growl, like the world reminding her that storms never last forever, but they always leave something changed behind. And as she drove off into the night, she couldn't stop thinking about the man who'd said, "It's just glass," and meant something much deeper. The morning after Daniel's suspension, the city felt strangely hollow to Ava. The hum of traffic, the buzz of her office elevator, the polite greetings of her staff, all of it rang empty, as if someone had turned down the volume on her world. She sat behind her desk, surrounded by polished glass and silence. Her assistant, Melanie, stood by the door, hesitant. "Ms. Sterling, are you all right? You've been staring at that file for 20 minutes. Ava blinked. "I'm fine." But the lie felt heavier than usual. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's calm face, his quiet dignity as he accepted blame for something he hadn't done. Those words echoed in her chest. Money comes back. Pride doesn't. He had lost a week's pay because of her system, her managers, her leadership. She'd built this empire to be efficient, profitable, perfect. But now, the word perfect tasted sour. "Melanie," she said suddenly, "bring me the employee files from Sterling and Coker downtown, the cleaning and maintenance staff, too." Her assistant blinked in surprise. "The janitorial team." "We usually don't. Now please." Within minutes, a stack of folders appeared on her desk. Ava flipped through them quickly until she found it, Daniel Reyes. The paper smelled faintly of toner and dust. His file was thin, too thin. A man who worked as hard and as long as he did should have had more than 2 pages of HR records. But what caught her attention wasn't what was there, it was what wasn't. The previous employment section was incomplete. The line for references left blank. There was a note written in the margin recommended by internal transfer. Ella R. Ava's pulse quickened. Ella R. The name felt oddly familiar. She clicked through the company's digital archives, her fingers moving faster than her thoughts. Ella Reyes, she typed into the database. The screen flickered loading. Then it appeared an old employment record dated 7 years back. Ava leaned closer. Former server, Sterling and Carrero Midtown. Deceased workplace incident. Her breath caught. "No," she whispered. She opened the report. It was short, deliberately short. Employee slipped in back kitchen during closing shift. Head injury sustained. Ambulance called too late. Fatality confirmed at Mercy General. Ava's stomach turned. There was more. A second document attached internal summary cause improper maintenance of non-slip flooring. Manager recommendation minimize publicity. Expense report filed to cover family payout. Payout amount $3,200. Ava's fingers went numb. $3,200. That was what his wife's life had been worth to her company. To her. She read the manager's signature at the bottom. Approved by A. Sterling. Her own name stared back at her like a scar carved in ink. The air in her office thickened. Ava pushed back from her desk, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. The rain outside had started again, tapping against the windows in soft, relentless rhythm. She remembered that year. The expansion, the long nights, the endless meetings about budget cuts and profit margins. The accident had been one of many minor incidents reported that quarter her legal team had handled it. She hadn't thought twice. but Daniel had been living with that minor incident ever since. Ava rose abruptly. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the day." Melanie looked startled. "Everything, even the investor." "All of it, but Midbingi." Sterling Ava turned her voice firm. "I said, cancel them." The elevator ride down felt endless. Each floor chimed like a heartbeat echoing the truth she could no longer avoid. When she stepped out onto the street, the rain met her like penance. Cold, unrelenting, honest. She arrived at the restaurant unannounced, hair-damp coat clinging to her shoulders. The staff scrambled when they recognized her, whispering her name like it was a warning. "Ms. Sterling. We didn't know you were coming." The manager appeared red-faced and breathless. "If you'd called ahead." "Where's Daniel Reyes?" Ava interrupted. Carl hesitated. "He's suspended, ma'am, for the glass incident. Policy requires I didn't ask about policy." The room went silent. Even the clinking of dishes seemed to stop. "He's at home, I suppose," Carl stammered. "Why?" "Because Ava said, her tone low and steady, I think I owe him more than a week's paycheck." Daniel's apartment was small, tucked above a laundromat that hummed with the sound of machines. When Ava knocked, the faint rustle of a child's voice came from inside. "Daddy." Someone's at the door. A moment later, Daniel opened it wearing an old gray t-shirt and surprise in his eyes. Grace Ava's heart stumbled. He still thought that was her name. "Can I come in?" He hesitated, glancing behind her at the rain, then stepped aside. "Sure." The apartment smelled faintly of soap and pancakes. A child's laughter floated from the other room, Emma, she assumed. Ava took in the small details, the mismatched furniture, the books stacked beside the couch, the framed crayon drawing that read, "Daddy, please me." Daniel crossed his arms. "Didn't expect to see you outside the restaurant." "I know," Ava said softly. There's something you deserve to know." He studied her face. "You look different. Not like the woman who eats alone in the corner." "I'm not her," she admitted. "Not exactly." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Ava's throat tightened. The truth sat heavy, pressing against her chest. "My name isn't Grace," she said. "It's Ava. Ava Sterling." The silence that followed was thick enough to hear the rain through the walls. Daniel blinked. "Sterling." "As in, yes," she said quietly. "As in that Sterling." His face hardened disbelief and betrayal, flickering together. "You're the owner?" "I am." She swallowed. "And I didn't come here to defend myself. I came to tell you I found something. About your wife." Daniel froze. His voice dropped to a whisper. Ava nodded, opening the folder she'd brought. "She worked for me. At another branch. There was an accident. The report was buried." He took the papers from her hands. His eyes scanned the lines, his jaw tightening with every word. When he reached the signature, he stopped. "You approved this," he said, voice breaking. "I did," she whispered, "without even reading it. I was too focused on profits. I didn't know until yesterday." He stared at her for a long time, the silence broken only by the hum of the dryer downstairs. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but sharp. "You came all the way here to tell me you're sorry." "Yes," Ava said, "because you deserve that much, and because I don't want to keep being the person who didn't care enough to look." Daniel set the papers down, rubbing his face with both hands. "You know what it's like to lose someone because someone else was careless." Ava's voice cracked. "Not until now." He looked at her eyes, wet but steady. "You can't fix the past, Miss Sterling." "I know," she said, "but maybe I can start cleaning up what's left." He laughed softly, bitter, exhausted. "You sound like me. Maybe that's not a bad thing." They stood in the small apartment, two people tied together by an accident neither could undo. Outside, the rain kept falling steady and cold, washing the city clean in slow motion. And for the first time, Ava Sterling, the woman who'd built an empire, felt small enough to finally see the truth beneath it. The rain had stopped sometime after midnight, but the city still smelled like it, clean, raw, and heavy with things washed away. Ava drove aimlessly through empty streets, headlights slicing through puddles, her hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. Daniel's face haunted her. Not the anger, he hadn't yelled, hadn't cursed. That would have been easier. No, it was the quiet in his eyes, the kind that came from wounds too deep for noise. She'd spent her life managing crises, legal scandals, financial losses, staff walkouts, but none of them had ever made her feel like this. This was different. This was personal. She parked in front of her building but couldn't bring herself to go inside. The penthouse would be too quiet, too clean, and right now she needed the opposite. She sat there staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror until the rain began again, a slow, forgiving drizzle. Her father used to say, "Rain doesn't wash away guilt. It just gives you time to look at what's left." For once, she understood what he meant. By morning, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. But she didn't stay home. She drove straight back to Daniel's building, the folder still on her passenger seat. The city was just waking up, coffee shops, buzzing buses, sighing at every stop, the faint scent of fresh bread wafting through the air. When he opened the door, she saw the surprise flicker across his face again, followed quickly by guarded distance. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice low. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," she said softly. "But I had to come. Why, you already said everything last night." "Not everything." He exhaled, stepping aside reluctantly. "You've got 5 minutes." Inside, the apartment felt smaller in daylight, or maybe it was just that her presence didn't belong there. Emma's school books were spread across the table. A half-empty bowl of cereal sat beside a mug that said, "World's okayest dad." Ava smiled faintly at that. "You're selling yourself short." Daniel didn't answer. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "What do you want, Miss Sterling? I wanted to tell you I'm changing things. I can't undo what happened, but I can make sure no one else goes through what you did." He looked skeptical. "You really think you can fix an entire company? I don't know," she admitted. "But I'm going to try. I already reopened the case file. The payout your wife received, it wasn't enough. I'm setting up a foundation in her name, for employees and families who've been hurt on the job." Daniel was silent. The sound of a clock ticking filled the space between them. "She deserves that much," Ava said. "And so do you." He turned away, his hand running over his face. "You can't buy redemption, Miss Sterling." "I'm not trying to," she said quickly. "This isn't about money. It's about responsibility." He faced her then, his voice quiet but steady. "You don't get it. Responsibility isn't writing a check. It's living with the mess you made and not walking away." Ava's throat tightened. Then, "Teach me how." That stopped him. He stared at her, the words hanging heavy in the air. "Why would you care? You don't even know me." "Because I do now," she said, "and I can't unknow what I've learned." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Then Daniel sighed, his shoulders dropping. "You really didn't know about her, did you?" "No," Ava whispered. "I didn't." He nodded slowly, as if deciding whether to believe her. She was working double shifts to cover Emma's medical bills. She always said she'd quit once I found a better job. The night she died, she called me, said she'd stay just 1 more hour to help close up. He swallowed hard. I told her not to. I told her to come home. But she stayed. Ava closed her eyes, fighting back tears. And I made sure that hour was worth $3,000 and a buried report. Daniel shook his head. "You didn't kill her, Miss Sterling. You just forgot she was real." The words hit like a hammer, not cruel, but true. She stepped closer. "You said last night that I can't fix the past. You're right, but maybe I can stop running from it." For the first time, he met her eyes without anger. "And what if it's too late?" "Then I'll stay," she said simply. "Even if it's too late, I'll stay until something good comes out of this." Silence, the kind that felt alive, trembling with things unsaid. A small voice interrupted it. "Daddy," Ava turned. Emma stood in the doorway, hair tousled, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. Her eyes flicked from her father to Ava. "Who's that?" Daniel softened instantly. "This is Miss Sterling. She works at Daddy's restaurant." Emma smiled sleepily. "You make the pancakes." Ava blinked, startled, then laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "Not yet, but maybe I could learn." The little girl nodded solemnly. "They're hard to flip." Daniel smiled faintly. "You're not wrong." Emma shuffled to the table, climbing into her chair. The normalcy of the moment, the cereal crunching, the quiet laughter, felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Ava looked at Daniel. "She's beautiful. She's my reason for everything," he said softly. Ava nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Then she's why I'll do this right." When she left the apartment, the rain had stopped again, but the streets still glistened with it. Ava didn't drive home. Instead, she walked past storefronts opening for the day, past the smell of bread and coffee, past people who would never know the weight she carried. Every sound, the shuffle of shoes on wet pavement, the honk of distant traffic, even the sigh of the wind, felt sharper, more alive. She realized then that Daniel had been right. Money couldn't buy redemption. It wasn't something you paid for once. It was something you chose every day, even when no one was watching. Back in his apartment, Daniel sat beside Emma, who was coloring now. Her tiny hand reached for his. "Daddy," she said, "why was that lady sad?" He hesitated, because she remembered something she forgot for a long time. Emma frowned. What did she forget? That people matter more than money. The little girl nodded as if it were the simplest truth in the world. "You already know that." Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah, but some people need reminding." He looked toward the window where sunlight was breaking through the clouds, streaking across the floor like gold. Somewhere out there, Ava Sterling was walking under that same light, not cleansed, not redeemed, but changed. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt something shift inside him, too. The ache of the past was still there, but it wasn't all he felt anymore. Maybe forgiveness wasn't something you gave. Maybe it was something you allowed yourself to feel when someone finally decided to stop running. The air felt strange that night, heavy, restless, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Ava stood by the window of her office, looking out at the storm clouds gathering over downtown. Lightning flashed far in the distance, and for the first time in years, she didn't think about profit margins or quarterly forecasts. She thought about Daniel. It had been 3 days since she'd visited him. 3 days of silence that felt louder than any boardroom debate. She'd sent an email to every department head launching the review of all safety protocols and ordered the reallocation of company funds into the new Ella Reyes Foundation. But paperwork didn't bring peace, not to him, not to her. Something was still unsettled, something unfinished. She turned away from the window and grabbed her keys. When she arrived at the restaurant, the night shift was in full swing. Sterling & Co. gleamed as it always did, but Ava could see now what she hadn't before, the cracks beneath the shine. The exhausted cook wiping sweat from his brow. The young waitress massaging her sore wrist. The quiet hum of labor that kept this kingdom alive. Daniel was there too, back from suspension, working as if nothing had happened. He didn't look up when she entered. He was mopping near the kitchen doors, his motion steady, hypnotic, as if the mop itself had its own heartbeat. "Evening," she said softly. He turned, startled. "Miss Ye Sterling, you're back." She nodded. "So are you." He smiled faintly. "Bills don't wait." She stepped closer, her voice low. "Neither does change." Daniel studied her face. Something in her eyes told him she wasn't just here to inspect. She was searching for something deeper, maybe redemption, maybe courage. Before he could speak, a sudden pop echoed from the kitchen. Then another, louder, sharper. Someone shouted, "Smoke!" The next second, chaos erupted. The smell hit first burning oil, acrid and suffocating. Then came the alarm screaming through the air like panic-given sound. "Everybody out!" Carl the manager yelled, his face pale. The cooks dropped pans. Waiters rushed to help customers out the front doors. Ava coughed, covering her mouth. Black smoke rolled from the kitchen like a storm unleashed. Daniel grabbed a towel, soaked it in water, and tied it around his face. "We need to clear the back," he shouted over the alarm. Ava's heart hammered. "The fire department's coming. There are people still inside." Before she could stop him, Daniel disappeared into the smoke. "Daniel!" She screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the noise. Instinct pulled her forward. The heat hit like a wall, searing her lungs. The scent of burning grease mixed with wood and plastic choking her senses. Somewhere deep inside the haze, she heard coughing and Daniel's voice calling out. "This way. Keep low." She followed the sound. Through the smoke, she saw him a silhouette guiding two terrified dishwashers toward the exit. He shoved them through the back door, then turned back. "What are you doing here?" he shouted at her. "I wasn't going to leave you." She coughed. He glared, but there was no time to argue. Another explosion, smaller this time, but close, shook the room. A beam cracked overhead, and Daniel pulled her down just as debris fell where she'd been standing. The noise was deafening. The world reduced to heat smoke and breath. "Go!" he shouted again, his hand gripping her wrist. But as they moved, Daniel stumbled, his foot caught on a fallen chair leg, his ankle twisting sharply. He grunted in pain, falling to one knee. "Daniel, keep going. Not without you?" He tried to push himself up, but the limp was bad. Ava slung his arm over her shoulders, half dragging him toward the faint glow of the exit. The air felt like fire inside her throat. Her vision blurred. Almost there, he rasped. A burst of fresh air hit them as they broke through the door. Rain had begun to fall, thick, heavy drops that hissed when they touched the flames. The contrast was jarring fire and water destruction and mercy colliding in one chaotic ballet. Paramedics rushed forward, pulling Daniel from her grasp, guiding them both to safety. Someone threw a blanket over her shoulders. Another handed her an oxygen mask. But Ava barely noticed any of it. She was watching Daniel. His face was streaked with soot. His breathing labored, but he was alive. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. He nodded weakly. "You shouldn't have come in there. Neither should you." He tried to laugh, but coughed instead. "Guess we're both bad at staying out of trouble." She smiled through the tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You saved people, Daniel. So did you." The fire roared behind them, consuming everything they'd known the restaurant, the gleaming symbol of her success, the monument she'd built to herself. But Ava didn't feel loss. She felt clarity. Hours later, the fire was finally under control. The rain kept falling, washing ash into the gutters. Ava sat beside Daniel on the curb, both wrapped in blankets, the faint hum of fire engines filling the silence. He looked at her with tired eyes. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "I thought I'd be devastated, but all I feel is free. Free." She glanced at the smoking ruins. That place, it was built on everything I thought mattered. Perfection. Power. But all it took was one spark to burn it down. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Fire doesn't just destroy Ava. Sometimes it clears the way. The truth of it settled between them. She exhaled. "You almost died in there." He shrugged. "Almost living doesn't count for much either." Ava turned to him, voice shaking. "I can't lose anyone else because of me." "You didn't lose me." The rain softened, turning to a drizzle. Ava realized she was holding his hand, their fingers entwined under the shared blanket. The warmth of his palm grounded her steady as his voice had been since the day they met. "Daniel," she said quietly, "I don't know what comes next, but I don't want to keep doing this alone." He looked down at their hands, then back at her. "You won't have to." Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, not the angry kind, but low and tired like a storm, finally ready to sleep. The firefighters moved like shadows around them, their voices fading into the rhythm of the rain. The city breathed again. And in that small, fragile moment, two people who had spent their lives cleaning up the messes of others finally allowed themselves to stop running, to sit in the wreckage, and to believe that maybe, just Maybe something beautiful could still rise from the ashes. 6 months later, spring had returned to the city, and with it a kind of quiet rebirth. The air smelled of rain and coffee and promise. Ava stood outside the newly rebuilt restaurant, her heart pounding like it had on the first day she ever opened one. But this time the sign above the door didn't read Sterling & Co. It read The Haven. Simple, honest, warm. She ran her fingers across the gold lettering, the paint still faintly tacky beneath her touch. The Haven. It was Daniel's word, not hers. He'd said it one evening when they were talking about what came next. A restaurant can't just feed people, he'd told her. It has to shelter them, too. Now that idea had become a reality. Inside, the soft murmur of staff preparing for the reopening blended with the faint hiss of the espresso machine. The air carried the scent of fresh bread and lemon, familiar but somehow gentler. The tables weren't set with linen and crystal anymore, but with wooden platters, handwritten menus, and vases filled with wildflowers. Ava watched as employees moved about, not in hurried obedience, but in quiet purpose. They smiled. They laughed. The weight she used to feel walking into her restaurants, the invisible pressure of perfection, had lifted. And at the center of it all stood Daniel, clipboard in hand, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his voice calm and sure. "Make sure the community board's updated," he told a server, "and someone check on the donation box near the door." He turned, catching Ava watching him. "You're early." "I couldn't sleep," she said, smiling. "It's strange, first opening I've ever been nervous for." Daniel chuckled. "That's a good sign. Means it matters." She walked closer, lowering her voice. "Are you sure we're ready?" He nodded. "More ready than we've ever been." It was true. The Haven wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was an idea. Every employee now received fair pay, full health coverage, and a share of profits. The Ella Reyes Foundation had already helped 4 families of workers facing medical hardships. And every evening, one table near the window stayed open, a compassion table, where anyone in need could sit and eat for free, no questions asked. Ava had expected pushback from investors, even outrage. But something unexpected had happened. The story of the fire had spread. People admired her transparency, her humility. Customers lined up not just to eat, but to belong. Daniel looked around, nodding with quiet satisfaction. "You know," he said softly, "she'd be proud." Ava turned to him. "Who Ella?" he said. She believed in places like this, places that felt like home. Ava smiled faintly. "So do I." For a moment, they just stood there, the hum of the restaurant around them, the promise of something new, humming under their skin. When the doors opened that evening, the Haven filled quickly. Families, couples, old regulars from the Sterling days, they all came. Ava moved between tables, greeting guests, listening to laughter, soaking in the sound of a place finally alive in the right way. Near the front, a small group had gathered around the community board Daniel had set up. It was covered in handwritten notes, photographs, thank you letters. One read, "When I lost my job, your staff fed me for a week without asking for anything in return. Thank you for treating me like a person again." Another note simply said, "For Ella. Her kindness lives on." Ava felt her chest tighten. She turned to find Daniel standing by the board, reading one of the notes with a soft smile. "Looks like word got out," she said. He nodded. "People remember kindness. It just takes them time to realize how much it matters." Ava studied him for a moment. He looked healthier now, lighter, like someone who had finally set down a burden he'd carried too long. His hair was a little longer, his smile more frequent. And every time he looked at her there was warmth. There's something unspoken, but deeply understood. She wanted to say something to thank him for teaching her everything she'd forgotten about humanity, but before she could, Tom, the young waiter from months ago, called out from across the room. "Daniel, we've got a full compassion table tonight." Daniel's grin widened. "Good." He turned to Ava. "Come see." At the table by the window sat an elderly man, a young mother with a toddler, and a man in a work uniform with weary eyes. Each had a plate of warm food, laughter mingling with the clinking of silverware. "They're not just eating," Daniel said quietly. "They're healing." Ava felt tears sting her eyes. "You did this." "No," he said softly. "We did this." Later that night, after the last customer had left, the two of them sat together in the now quiet dining room. The candles on each table flickered gently, reflecting in the polished windows. Outside, the city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, the same city that had once felt cold and unreachable. Ava leaned back in her chair. "When I lost the restaurant in the fire, I thought that was the end. But maybe it had to burn down for me to see what really mattered." Daniel nodded. "Sometimes you've got to lose your walls to find your doors." She laughed softly. "You always know how to turn tragedy into poetry." He smiled. "It's the janitor in me. We see beauty in the cleanup." Ava's laughter faded into something quieter, more fragile. "Do you ever miss her?" He looked down at his hands. "Every day. But tonight, I think she'd want me to stop living like the world took something from me. Maybe it gave me something instead." He met her eyes, and for a moment the air between them was charged, gentle but electric, like what she whispered. Daniel held her gaze, like another chance to stay. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of grief, of gratitude, of possibility. Outside, rain began to fall again, not heavy, not cold, just enough to tap softly against the windows. Ava stood walking to the glass. "Funny," she said. "Every time something important happens, it rains." Daniel joined her. "Maybe the city's just helping us clean up." They watched as droplets streaked down the glass, catching the glow of the streetlights. The reflection showed them standing side by side, two people who'd survived fire loss and guilt and somehow found grace in the ashes. Ava turned to him, her voice a whisper. "Thank you, Daniel, for saving my restaurant. For saving me." He smiled. "You don't need saving anymore." "Maybe not," she said softly. "But I'm glad you stayed." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His hand found hers steady, warm, and the quiet of the haven held them both as if the building itself knew this was what it had been built for. Outside, the rain kept falling soft, forgiving, endless. Evening light spilled across the windows of the haven, bathing the dining room in a soft, golden hue. Outside, the city moved as it always had, hurried, restless, but inside time felt slower, gentler, as though the world had learned to breathe again. It had been exactly 6 months since the haven opened its doors, and tonight it was full. The air hummed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the rich, familiar scent of roasted garlic and warm bread. There was no pretense here anymore, no cold perfection. Just life, messy, loud, beautiful. Ava stood near the entrance, watching the flow of it, all the people, the smiles, the connections that filled every corner. This, she thought, this is what success was supposed to feel like. A small hand tugged at her sleeve. Miss Ava, Emma said, looking up at her with that same spark her father carried. "Daddy says we can sit with you tonight." "Is that true?" Ava smiled. "It's more than true. I was hoping you'd ask." She led the girl through the room, weaving between tables until they reached their usual corner, the same spot Ava had once chosen to hide in back when she didn't want to be seen. Now it was the warmest place in the building. Daniel was already there, setting down 3 plates. His shirt sleeves were rolled up his hands, still damp from the kitchen sink. "You cooked?" Ava asked, half amused. He shrugged. "We're short, 1-line cook tonight, and you know me. I hate seeing a dirty pan go to waste." Emma giggled. "Daddy says he's better at cleaning than cooking." Daniel chuckled. "And both of you are about to find out how true that is." Ava laughed softly, the sound easy and unguarded. 6 months ago, she couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. They sat together, and for a while the world outside didn't exist. They talked about everything and nothing, how Emma was doing in school, how Daniel had started mentoring some of the younger staff, how Ava had finally learned to take her coffee without checking emails at the same time. When the restaurant quieted, the sound of rain began again, soft, rhythmic, almost tender. It felt like a familiar friend returning just to witness how far they'd all come. Later, after dessert, Daniel stood and gestured toward the far wall. "Come on," he said to Ava. "You haven't seen the new board yet." She followed him to the display by the entrance, a collage of photographs, letters, and thank-you notes from customers. Across the top, someone had painted in neat script the heart of the haven. Ava read the letters silently. "When I lost my job, your staff made me feel human again. My mother passed last year, but this restaurant made her feel like family in her final weeks. To the janitor who said 3 words that changed everything, thank you for reminding me, kindness still exists." Her throat tightened. 3 words, she murmured. "They remember." Daniel smiled beside her. "It's funny, isn't it? Words are small, but they can hold so much." She looked at him. "Do you ever think about that night? The fire?" He nodded. "Every day, but not the flames. I think about the rain after." Ava tilted her head. "Why?" "Because that's when I realized we survived for a reason," he said simply. "Maybe to build this." She exhaled, her voice a whisper. "I used to think success was something you built upward, taller, bigger, higher, but it's not, is it?" Daniel smiled softly. "No, it's something you build outward toward people." They stood there watching as guests added new notes to the board, laughter filling the air. One of the servers lit candles at the compassion table, where a single mother and her son were finishing their meal. The little boy waved at Daniel, and he waved back. Every night, Daniel said quietly, someone new sits there. Every night, someone walks out lighter than when they came in. Ava nodded. And every night I realize it wasn't the building I needed to rebuild. It was myself. When the last guest left and the staff began to clean up, Ava lingered near the window, staring out at the rain. The reflection of the restaurant shimmered in the glass, the lights, the laughter, the soft movements of people closing up for the night. Daniel joined her, drying his hands with a towel. "You ever think about how far we've come?" Ava smiled faintly. "I think about it every day, and I still can't believe I almost missed all this because I was too busy chasing numbers." He leaned against the wall beside her. "You didn't miss it. You just took the long way here." Outside, Emma twirled under the awning, laughing as raindrops brushed her cheeks. "Daddy, Miss Ava." "Come dance." Daniel laughed. "She's persistent. She's happy," Ava said, watching the girl. "And that's everything." Without overthinking, Ava stepped out from under the awning. The rain was cool, cleansing. Daniel followed, shaking his head with mock exasperation. "See what you started," he teased. Emma squealed, spinning between them. "We're getting soaked." Ava laughed, lifting her face to the sky. "Let it rain." For the first time in years, the sound didn't remind her of loss. It sounded like freedom. Later, when the storm eased, they sat on the steps outside the restaurant, damp but content. Emma had fallen asleep in Daniel's lap, her small hand resting against his chest. "She's out," Ava whispered. "Rain always does that," he said. "It's like the world's lullaby." Ava turned to him, her voice soft. "Daniel, what do you think keeps people coming back here?" He thought for a moment. "It's not the food," he said. "It's how they feel when they leave. And how's that home?" The word lingered in the air, simple, whole enough. Ava smiled through the quiet ache in her chest. "Home," she repeated. "That's what we built, isn't it?" Daniel nodded. "That's what you built." She shook her head gently. "No. What we built." The rain had slowed to a drizzle now, and the street shimmered under the glow of the street lamps. Ava looked back at the window where the words, "The Haven," glowed softly in gold. "It means a safe place," Emma had said once. "A place where people feel they belong." Ava rested her head lightly against Daniel's shoulder. "I think we finally found ours." He smiled, voice barely above a whisper. Took us long enough. They sat there as the last drops of rain fell, not saying anything, not needing to. The night was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of warmth of laughter still echoing through the walls of the promise of new beginnings. And as the city lights reflected on the wet streets, Ava Sterling, the woman who had once built her empire on perfection, finally understood the truth Daniel had been trying to show her from the beginning. Perfection wasn't something you created. It was something you cared for. One small act of kindness at a time. When they finally stood to go inside, Daniel looked back at the restaurant one last time. "You know," he said, 3 words changed everything. Ava smiled, eyes shining. "Which ones?" He turned to her, that quiet, steady smile she'd grown to trust lighting his face. "Welcome home, Ava." And for once, she didn't correct him. She just reached for his hand, squeezed it gently, and whispered, "Yes, they do." And maybe that's what this story was always about, not just redemption or forgiveness, but remembering what truly matters. Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, a smile, a patient word, a simple gesture can change the course of someone's life. Just like Daniel changed Ava's. So, tonight as you finish listening to this story, take a moment to think about the people who've shown you kindness when you least expected it. Have you ever met someone whose compassion changed your heart or your path? We'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. You never know who might need to read your words today. And tell us, where are you watching from tonight? Whether it's a quiet corner of your home, a late drive through the city, or a coffee shop where stories like this feel just a little closer. We're grateful you're here with us. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss the next story that just might remind you what really matters. Thank you for being part of this journey, for every minute you've shared, for every emotion you felt along the way. And remember, kindness doesn't cost a thing, but it can heal everything. Until next time, take care of your heart, take care of each other, and keep believing in the good that still exists all around us.